Imagine being raised in a world without social media, without smartphones buzzing in your pocket, without instant validation at your fingertips. Yet somehow you learn to adapt, thrive, and lead across analog and digital worlds. That's the psychological fingerprint of Generation X, the often overlooked cohort sandwiched between the baby boomers and millennials whose mindset quietly shapes much of the workplace, culture, and family life today. What makes Gen X tick isn't flashy trends or viral fame, it's a deep-rooted psychological story written in resilience, independence, skepticism, and practicality. They didn't grow up with constant feedback or protective parenting. Many were latchkey kids, coming home from school to an empty house and learning early that if something needed to be done, they'd better do it themselves. That early experience didn't make them anxious. It made them self-sufficient. Psychologists describe Generation X as inherently independent. This wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy. With both parents often working long hours or families headed by a single parent, Gen Xers learn to care for themselves, solve problems on their own, and make decisions without constant supervision. This shapes not just their personalities, but their worldview. Confidence isn't something handed to them. It's something they earned through lived experience. This self-reliance feeds into another defining psychological feature, pragmatism. Gen X doesn't chase ideals or absolute truths the way some later generations might. They look at a situation, break it down logically, and ask, what works? What doesn't? Their approach to life is grounded, results-oriented, and often realist to a fault. Expectations are tempered by experience, ambitions balanced with practical awareness. But independence doesn't mean isolation. One of the subtle traits of Gen X psychology is balanced skepticism. They grew up witnessing political scandals, economic recessions, rapid cultural shifts, and the rise and fall of institutions many older generations trusted implicitly. The result? Gen X learn not to be naive, but not to be cynical for cynicism's sake either. They trust evidence and experience more than rhetoric. Their healthy skepticism also shapes how they process information. Gen X grew up with cable TV and early internet, meaning they didn't just absorb messages passively. They learned to critically evaluate media, to dig deeper, and to question the narrative rather than swallow it whole. This isn't stubbornness, it's discernment. They assess based on what they've seen work or fail. Emotionally, Generation X tends to be resilient and stable-minded. Having lived through economic downturns, shifting job markets, and societal upheaval, they developed mental toughness not as a goal but as a default pattern of coping. When life throws curveballs, they don't collapse, they adapt. They've learned to regulate emotions, to handle pressure, and to stay grounded even when the world feels unstable. This resilience is reflected in their work lives. Gen Xers are ambitious yet balanced. They pursue goals fiercely, but they also know the cost of burnout and the value of downtime. Unlike older generations who equated success with unending work hours, or younger ones who chase instant gratification, Gen X values work-life harmony. They saw too many parents consumed by work and vowed not to repeat that cycle. Their psychological profile also shows a blend of analog comfort and digital agility. Gen X didn't grow up with technology as toddlers, but they adopted it as young adults, bridging the gap between pre-digital tools and the hyper-connected world. They understand how things used to work and how they work now, giving them a unique cognitive flexibility that few other groups possess. They can use technology as a tool without being controlled by it, a rare psychological equilibrium today. Another feature worth exploring is fearlessness tempered by caution. Gen X isn't reckless, they are calculated risk-takers. They understand uncertainty but aren't paralyzed by it. Whether starting a business, adapting to new roles, or balancing careers with family responsibilities, Gen X approaches risks with a balanced mindset, weighing options carefully but willing to act when opportunity calls. Let's talk about trust because it plays a subtle but powerful role in their psychology. Gen X isn't inherently distrustful, but they don't give trust lightly. They're willing to believe, but they need evidence first. This makes them less susceptible to hype, less swayed by superficial trends, and more focused on authentic human connection. They value loyalty, not because it's trendy, but because they know what betrayal feels like. All of these psychological traits converge to form a generation that doesn't scream, but endures. They don't seek attention, but they quietly build institutions, mentor younger colleagues, and stabilize teams. In workplaces today, Gen X often functions as the bridge, translating long-established norms to younger minds. and introducing digital fluency to those raised with it. They balance respect for tradition with openness to change. Yet, psychologically, many Gen Xers feel forgotten. They're not the rebels like boomers, nor the digital natives like millennials and Gen Z. That middle status has shaped a mindset of self-sufficiency over dependence, of doing the work without applause. And while that sometimes leads to underestimation by others, it also seeds one of their greatest strengths, the ability to do meaningful work without needing constant validation. Understanding Gen X psychology helps explain why they behave the way they do in relationships, careers, and life decisions. They value authenticity over pretense, independence over control, and resilience over avoidance. Their psychological framework isn't built on dramatic upheaval but on consistent adaptation, quiet yet powerful, reflective yet ready for action. And maybe that's the most defining psychological trait of all. Gen X doesn't just survive change, they navigate it with clarity, confidence, and a mindset shaped not by dependency, but by experience. If you want to understand why Gen X thinks the way it does, don't look for trends or memes, look at the lived experiences that sculpted their psychological lens.